Okay, hello, welcome back to another video. Today it is a very special video because I'm going to be teaching you my favourite weapon against the Sicilian defence. This is a move that is played only 0.7% of the time against the Sicilian defence and is almost guaranteed to catch your Sicilian playing opponent off guard on move 2. Yes, move 2. Now that is not move 17. We're not trying to come up with some little novelty on like the 17th move of the Najdorf. We're looking at surprising our opponent on move 2. What I'm referring to is, of course, the Mengarini Sicilian, which begins with e4, of course, c5 the Sicilian defense, and on move 2 you play a3. This move a3 is what's going to characterize all of our positions today. We're going to be looking at what happens from this position. As you can see, I've included a little theory tree down here so you guys can hopefully follow along with what's going on. I've got a little currently studying thing. This should now say basic position if I can edit correctly. And basically we're going to look at why a3, even though it looks a little passive, is such a venomous move, and hopefully you guys are going to come away from this and be able to genuinely surprise and genuinely crush your opponents with a very solid opening that you just do not see over the board. However, just before I enlighten you with this genius bit of chess theory, I've got one question. Pub quiz: what do the following have in common? London, Budapest, Berlin, Vienna. If you said chess openings, you'd be right, but that is not the answer I'm looking for. They're all places that the government will think you are when you use Atlas VPN. Right now, Atlas VPN is running a big deal. They are offering their premium service for just $1.83 per month with 3 months extra and a 30-day money-back guarantee. This is a limited time offer, so make sure to click my link in the description below and check it out. With Atlas VPN, you can watch all your favorite shows. We've got Breaking Bad here. You can watch Lord of the Rings. You can watch anything. I'm not even going to talk about this one, what's going on there. Anything that's blocked in your country, Top Gear, you can use their service. Even if you're using it on your phone, as you see here, you can still use it on any other device when you have their premium service. It is not limited to just one device. If you want to be protected while you watch Will Taylor Chess on the big screen, be like this woman, use Atlas VPN. Once again, that is $1.83 per month, about £1.50 for my British audience. Click the link in the description. Let's get on with the video. Okay, so let's get into the tutorial. We are of course going for e4, c5 and a3. This is our starting position. Now, the reason that the theory tree is labeled as non-knight c6 responses and knight c6 responses is because if they play the move knight c6 here, we get to play this really exciting idea with b4, gambiting a pawn. We will get to that. However, first, we're just going to show you basically what to do if they play either d6 or maybe g6, two really popular moves going for some kind of dragon Sicilian, and basically ignoring this whole a3 idea here. So if your opponent goes for g6 here, trying to play some kind of hyper accelerated dragon, although it's not quite that, I don't think, because we've got a3. Basically, Sicilian players are absolute theory merchants. They will stock up on 25 moves of book theory, trying to play it all. If you just say no on move 2, and they're going to be so annoyed. If they play g6 here, you can play a super interesting move. First of all, let me just mention, you can just go knight f3, you can play for d4, knight c3, bishop e3, etc. Pretty standard stuff. Or, what I'm going to recommend, of course, is h4 here. Now, because this isn't really the main point of the video, we're not going to spend long on this move at all. I might talk about it in a future video. However, black's best idea, practically speaking, is just to play h5, not letting you play h5, in which case you carry on with knight c6, knight f3, maybe even bishop c4 to drop the bishop back to a2 at some point, and you're going to have a pleasant game. However, the venom behind the move h4 is that if your opponent goes for bishop g7, they think out with the bishop, they've gone for their hyper accelerated dragon, you're going to play h5 here, and this is just really interesting because if they try and play knight f6, yeah, if they're an autopilot just pre-moving their hyper accelerated dragon, here you're actually winning. If we turn on the evaluation here, you can see it's 1.6, and that is because we're going to play the move h6 here. The point of this is, of course, that we're just kicking the bishop back to f8, and you see we've just absolutely marched up here with the pawn. This is an idea that you can play, and you're actually doing really well here. After e5, the knight goes back, and then d4, because if takes, what we see is the queen is on this diagonal that we absolutely dominate. The bishop can't get there. f6 is just a weakening move. And so if your opponent attacks the queen, you're going to go back to c3 here, maintaining this diagonal. And if they play something like d5, let's turn on the engine here, then of course you're going to play en passant takes. d5 is actually the best move, discovering onto the rook. Then they're going to play e5. This is basically the only way to hold on to this. And after knight f3, they can recapture this defending the pawn, but we can just put loads of pressure on it, pinning the knight, etc. And this rook is absolutely abysmal. We have a huge space advantage, maybe even ideas of a rook lift at some point, who knows. One more thing about this line is that if your opponent doesn't really want you to discover onto their rook here, they might be tempted to play e6. However, here the dark squares are absolutely abysmal, with ideas of, if after knight f3, ideas of bishop g5 inbound. This is not a good position, because not only do we have an extremely scary presence here on the king side, preventing castling king side being a great idea, but also our opponents played a Sicilian, so they don't even have a c-pawn behind which to castle if they want to go queen side, and they're not even safe in the center because we just dominate these squares. And I mean, the king's just not having a good time here. You're going to have a great game from here. Now, of course, that is not the main point of the video. I kind of just wanted to throw that idea in here because h4 is really funny here. Most of the time you'll just see h5 and then you get on with the normal game. However, if your opponent goes for d6 here, which is what we're now going to look at, there are some masters that still play b4 and you can still go for it. What I'm going to recommend is kind of just a really versatile setup against almost any open Sicilian, which is going for knight f3, and after something like knight c6, we're going to go for something that very closely resembles the Yugoslav attack. The idea of the Yugoslav attack is to basically break with d4, have this knight here on d4 like this, and then have a knight on c3, a bishop on e3, the queen on d2, and castle queenside. So the ensuing game, with also f3 as well, sorry, to basically keep this bishop safe from the idea of knight g4. We'll go through an example of that, for instance, d4, cd4, knight e4, knight f6, and then something like knight c3 developing, defending the pawn. And then generally, if your opponent's gone for d6, they'll probably now go for one of these Sicilian dragon ideas with g6. Here you're just going to go f3, bishop g7, bishop e3, kingside castles, and queen d2. And basically, as you see here, I've got these arrows. Our idea is to castle queenside and push g4, h4, h5, tear the h-file open, remove the dark square bishop, get the queen in there, checkmate, game over, thanks very much. Now, it might seem like I've kind of just rattled off a bunch of moves there. Generally speaking, you will be able to get a position that looks a lot like this with this kind of diamond of pieces here. It's a really versatile setup and basically happens whenever you go for this kind of knight f3 breaking with d4 idea. This is what I would recommend trying to play. This is like really good sort of like master level theory, except we've also got the move a3 in. So I guess we're kind of a tempo down, because maybe it would be better in this position to have a2 and be castled queenside, for instance. However, it doesn't really matter. We're going to have a really nice, pawn storm on the king side and attack like this. One other thing I will say is your opponent really has to know what they're doing in order to not get absolutely crushed by these pawns. They have to play d5 here pretty much. If we turn on the engine here, yeah, d5 by far the best move. Queen a5 is the second best move. And if they try and go for an idea like this, you're just going to take, and then you're actually going to be completely winning because of how weak this pawn is and how well you control d5. So really interesting way to play. Personally, I would go for this instead of trying to play b4 against d6. You can investigate that if you want, but let's get on to the fun stuff. The fun stuff is, of course, knight to c6 in this position. Now, why is this the fun stuff? Why would I say that? I mean, how is this much different? Well, the idea that you're going to go for here is, as I've said, b4. Now, this is the point of a3 that we're supporting b4. And some of you might be thinking, well, after takes, and knight takes here, you've just lost a pawn. Will you be completely correct? However, after c3, knight c6, and d4, this is the point. We have dominant control over the center, super open development for the bishops, the knight can come to f3 really easily, as well as this rook being on a beautiful open file. Now, we're going to look just quickly, as you see in the theory tree, at what happens if they decline this gambit, if they don't take here. But then we're going to get into the fun stuff. Now, what I'm going to advise if they choose not to take this pawn here and play a move instead like e5, this is the most common way, is, as you see here, playing b5 and just kicking the knight. In this particular line, after knight d4, we can play c3, and after knight to e6, if we turn on the engine here, we have a reasonable position. The engine wants us to play knight to f3, but basically after knight f3, we're going to look to break towards the center here. We're going to have an open a file and basically just a really weird looking pawn on b5 that can be kind of a thorn in black's queenside, and it's just not obvious that this knight's necessarily well placed after, for instance, let's just say if our opponent makes kind of a nothingy move, immediately, okay, well, actually no, they need to defend this pawn, but let's say if they defend the pawn like this, Then we can go for an idea like d4, and after takes, we've got a really big centre. Potentially we can even play d5 at some point, and you see our advantage slightly builds. However, almost everyone will take this pawn. I'm just saying if they don't, play b5, kick the knight about, and try and have some fun in that way. For instance, if your opponent goes for e6, you can play b5, and then if we just turn the engine on here, if the knight ventures into the centre, we can play d4. If the knight ventures back here, then we can just get on with standard ideas, and this knight just provides us with a load of tempo for claiming a lot of space in the centre. However, finally we can move on to the Gambit Accepted part of our theory tree. Knight takes b4. Now, what is the point? Well, as I mentioned, we want to go c3 here, the knight goes back, and we want to play d4. And just look at this. Yes, you're a pawn down, but your dominance on the centre is insane. The bishops are going to be super active, and also the key part of playing a3 is that we take this way and open the a file. Now that's going to be really crucial for some of the main trap ideas that we're going to come across. However, as you see on the theory tree, there are two branches that I'd like to explore. One is just briefly, we're going to have a look at 6e6 ideas. So if they go for e6, trying to justify d5, which is basically the idea. Your opponents will almost always realize, I need to play d5, because if they push neither of their central pawns, their bishops are just dead through the center, and with our huge center, they're just going to get rolled. So if they do go for e6 here, what I tend to play in live games on the channel, some of you might remember, is the move f4, making a huge center, and after d5, going e5, and just trying to play with a massive center and maybe make the f5 break. The drawback of this is that you do give your opponent a really nice square for the knight on f5. They might even be able to go g6 and just completely outpost that knight there. It's still a really nice position for white. However, what I'm going to recommend to you here is that you go bishop to d3. The point is, after d5, we can go e5, and we open up the line for this bishop. We haven't committed the pawn to f4, because actually maybe there's a really interesting idea of a potential Greek gift, which for those of you familiar, you might be able to see the idea lining up once we get knight f3 in. If we see a bunch of kind of weird moves and our opponent, I mean, just, okay, ignore it, it's obvious blunders, but let's say our opponent goes for something like this here, then if we turn on the engine, you can see, obviously we're completely winning, so we can take a bishop, but there's also the move bishop takes h7, and the idea being that after you sacrifice this bishop, we get knight to g5, and if the king goes back, then we can go check here and checkmate. So you kind of line up, obviously this isn't going to be the exact position, but you line up the potential for this kind of Greek gift idea, and a lot of pressure regardless on if your opponent castles kingside. Let's just turn off the engine for a second. And if they don't castle kingside, either their king's in the center, or it's under an open a file and no c pawn. So I really like this way of playing. You set up an absolute godlike piece under the pawn structure, and you can also play the move knight to d2 here. The engine slightly prefers this, and if takes, you can take with the knight, and it's kind of similarly pleasant, but I guess your knight is far more developed. I would really recommend going for e5 here, because this is just like, you almost can't go wrong with this pawn chain and this bishop on d3. However, finally, we are going to look at if they play d5 here. This is the best move, and by far the most common move, and after takes, queen takes, this is where we play the really, really cool move, knight to a3. Now this is what I would refer to as the Mengarini trap. There are many ways for black to go wrong here. If we turn on the evaluation, you see that white's doing really well, but the best move's queen a5. Now 30 people out of thousands of games have ever played queen a5 in the Lichess database. Queen to a5 is just a ridiculous move, because after bishop d2, you're voluntarily stepping into not one, but two potential discoveries on this queen. It's insane. The point of queen a5 is that you can venture back down this diagonal here, and you know, white has to play something like bishop d2 if they want to move the knight, because they need to connect the queen to the rook. No one will be playing this. Don't even worry about it. The 5 most popular moves, and yes, I said 5 most popular moves, are all bad moves here. This is why I love this position. Let's just turn off the engine here. What would you play as black? I mean, be honest with yourself. If you looked at this position as black, are you not thinking, okay, just develop a knight, fine? Because that's what I'd think, personally. Developing a knight here is one of the most common moves, and it's the move that we're going to investigate the furthest, but it's just a bad move. It's just a really bad move. Look at the evaluation, plus 2.5. Why? Because as the engine shows us, knight to b5. The pressure here on c7 is insane. We're currently threatening a fork on the king, on the queen, and on the rook, all at the same time. Nice family fork there. And so the move people will play is almost always queen to d8. However, before we delve further into that line, yes, knight f6 is a horrible move, but let's keep the engine on here. You know what else is a horrible move? e6. Terrible, because knight b5. Oh look, what about e5? Terrible, because knight b5. Even the move a6, which looks like it prevents knight b5, you can still go knight b5. And now the engine finds some really interesting line after queen d8 here and knight to a5, but there's a really cool way to play with queen to a4, and after takes, you just play bishop takes, and after the bishop blocks, you just develop. And it's like, black just kind of struggles to move. I mean, yes, they're actually up a full piece here, but they're not going to be able to hold on to it just because of the activity. We're not going to go through this too much, because after bishop takes, we would just play queen takes and then win the knight, for instance. And if they decide to go for something like knight to f6, we can actually go knight to e5, and then we're just attacking this a billion times. Really interesting line. But as I said, most of the time your opponents won't be going a6 because it's kind of a stupid move. I have faced it a couple of times in videos. People sometimes play it thinking that it stops knight b5. It absolutely doesn't. And I think the most accurate move from the engine is knight c4 here, but we don't care about that. We're going to play knight b5 anyway. Or you can learn c4 and going for knight to b6 if you want. I just think it's simpler to basically think, right, I play knight a3, and then basically whatever my opponent does, I play knight b5. So you've reached a position in which basically 5 of the most popular moves are all blunders. It's a pretty great position. We're going to look in depth at knight to f6 because I think this is one of the most intuitive blunders. Developing the knight, it just looks like it can't be that bad, but it is, because we play knight to b5, queen goes back to d8, and then d5. And here is our final bifurcation of the theory tree. This is move 10. And basically our opponent has 2 choices. Do they want to take the pawn, or do they want to move this knight? Because if they don't do either, we're going to be able to take this knight. We're attacking a minor piece. Pretty simple. Now some of you might be sitting there thinking, what is going on? They're attacking this piece twice, and we're defending it once. That's just a free pawn. And many of your opponents will also think that. Knight takes pawn. I mean, what is wrong with that? Well, we play the beautiful queen takes knight. And oh no, we've hung our queen, but no one cares because we go knight to c7 check, and after the king moves, we pick the queen straight back up. The fact is, the queen is stuck defending the c7 square because of our beautiful knight here on b5. Now, there are about 30 people that have taken this pawn. However, the most popular move, that was being the second most popular move, the most popular move is knight to e5 here. If we have a quick look at the evaluation, you can see it is plus 5.6, and the engine shows us why. The idea is just to go bishop to f4, attack this knight, and should the knight drop back to g6, then you see the problem. We can play knight check, and this is absolutely beautiful because of course your opponent isn't going to want to give up their queen. If they do, you've won a queen for a minor piece. Come back here and say thanks in the comments. But if they decide to move their king here, you have the move bishop b5 checkmate. Look at the state of this mate. I mean, okay, if you get this, come back and just donate me like £5,000. So after bishop to f4, we've established this knight can't move because knight to c7, and they're going to lose their queen or get checkmated with a beautiful minor piece combination. So if they can't move their knight, they have to defend it, and they can't defend it with the queen because our knight holds those squares, so they have to use the other knight to defend this piece here. Now, if your opponent plays knight f to g4 here, we can just go queen to d4, and this is absolutely disastrous for your opponent. If they then go for f6, we can play h3, kick the knight, and after it goes back, play takes, pawn takes, queen here, and there's just no way to stop this threat. It's absolutely awful. And there's also going to be bishop b5 ideas afterwards. The engine, if we turn it on here, says +7, the best idea being king to f7. Absolutely ridiculous stuff. However, by far the most common response to bishop f4 is taking this knight and dropping it back to d7. Now here is where you play the beautiful move knight to f3. And there are 2 real choices here. Basically, take the knight or don't take the knight. If your opponent takes the knight, we're going to take back with the queen. And tell me how you're stopping knight c7 check. Forcing the queen to take, by the way, because this is a smother. There's just nothing to do. If the queen comes to b6, which is the best move, we go check, the king moves, we can pick up the rook, tempo on the queen. Sorry about that. This pawn here on the a file is going to fall. We have beautiful development, and we can castle our king beautifully. This king is horrible, and our opponent can't move either of their bishops or basically their rook. If, however, instead of capturing our knight, they play the move f6, then we have a really beautiful idea, which is knight f to d4, basically exploiting the holes that have been left in our opponent's position. This e6 square is ridiculously soft. If we get in there, we're going to be able to put this knight in here. Both knights will hit this square. We're going to hit the queen as well. It's going to be disgusting. So here, the best move is knight c5, defending that e6 square, but then we can simply play bishop takes, pawn takes, queen h5, g6, and then queen takes. And you see the ideas here. We're hitting the rook. We're also threatening the fork yet again. This knight on b5, the absolute goat of the position, jumping a3, straight to b5, I mean, what a game. After this check, by the way, let's just turn on the engine here. If your opponent doesn't go for g6 and they play king d7, the only other legal move, we can go queen to f5 check. And then if the king goes back to e8, which is the only move, then what you're going to do is go knight to e6 anyway, and now there's just so many problems. If the bishop takes your knight, we can play pawn takes, and I mean, yeah, need I say more? Need I say more? It's plus 11. I guess we'll just have a quick look. I haven't actually explored this directly yet. They can, of course, sack the knight, but if they go queen d6, oh, then we just take the queen straight up, okay. And else, I guess, like queen b6. Then we have mate in 8. You know what? To finish the video, let's just have some fun and explore this. Queenside castles with check. Okay, we're not going to look at queen e6 because that's just sacking the queen. So if the king moves, what happens? Then it's just check. Oh, blocks and just straight up checkmate. Wow. Wow. Insane stuff. You see the potency of this whole idea after f6 with the knight jumping in, the softness of these squares, plus 7.9. What more do you want from a position? So that concludes our deep dive into the Menger Sicilian. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Thank you very much for watching. If you made it all the way through the video, let me know in the comments. This has been kind of a longer awaited video, a lot of people asking for this one, so hopefully it was helpful and I went into enough detail, but not too much detail. And yeah, you can easily navigate the video, come back to it, learn it all, and maybe if you invent your own stuff off the back of this, because a lot of this, like I haven't learned this from a book or anything, I've kind of just worked with the engine and the Masters database and the games that I've played to come up with what I think are, you know, really nice playable ideas. Basically, a lot of it is just engine stuff, but also there are some times where I'm recommending a suboptimal move. You're going to have to deal with that if you're a subscriber of this channel, because we recommend suboptimal moves because they're very beautiful. So, yeah, again, thanks for watching. If you win any games with this, then send them to me on Lichess. And yeah, let me know if you enjoyed in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it all the way through, you're a legend. Goodbye.